Right, thank you, colleagues. If we can make a start. Agenda item 1 then is attendance. Everyone's here, so I presume there's no apologies. So next we go on to apologies for absence, none. Next then is declarations of interest. I'll hand over.
Thank you, Leader. There's an item on the agenda, number 7, in relation to 21st Century Schools programme. My advice is that members have a personal but not prejudicial interest if you are a LEA appointed governor of a school in Torfaen. Now, my understanding is that the following councillors are LEA appointed governors. If you could confirm. Councillor Richard Clark, LEA appointed governor, Crossakilog Primary and Comprehensive Schools. Councillor Veronica Crick, LEA appointed governor, Crossakilog Comprehensive School. And you'd also wish to declare the fact that your husband is chairman of Crossakilog School Governors. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also governor at Crownbridge.
Right, governor at Crownbridge. Thank you. Councillor Daniels, you are an LEA appointed governor at Cumberland High School. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Correct.
Can I just point out I'm a governor at Ysgol Panteg and also a parent governor at Bridgetown Primary. Okay, if we're happy to move on then, for the confirmation of minutes from the 4th of July. I'll take you through those page by page. Page 3, page 4, 5, 6 and 7, and the Welsh language version, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11 and page 12. Any matters of accuracy or matters arising from those minutes? No, that's great then. I'll move on to agenda item 5, which is updates on actions. Hand over to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. They're just there for information unless members have any questions.
Any questions, members? No. If I move on then to agenda item 6, which is the initial financial forecast 2017-18. And hand over to Nigel Aurelius.
Thank you, Leader. This is the initial financial forecast for 2017-18, basically based on quarter 1, as at the end of June. Members will see that the report articulates, a difficult situation at quarter 1, and we've had occasions such as this in the past. It's always been my approach and our approach that we don't treat situations like that as any kind of crisis, because that creates rather strange behaviours, but rather we approach it in a focused and disciplined way as a collective and ensure that the financial discipline holds and we improve the situation as the years go on. I think all authorities across Gwent are feeling pressure as at quarter 1. And I think they're all experiencing pressures, particularly within children's services, so we're not unique in that situation. And also we've had many years now of difficult financial settlements and difficult budgets that we're balancing too. So within that context, I'll just take members through the report. The key messages, obviously you've got the headline position there. Key thing to say is this is a forecast that will happen if we don't take any remedial action and we don't try and address the issue. A large part of that forecast has not yet occurred. In terms of the background, I mean, members will know that in terms of the budget being set and it being a difficult budget. So then in section 5 you have the forecast, and it's quite clear, where the big areas are, and I'll just briefly go through them now. Social care and housing, the pressure there is almost predominantly in relation to children's services and children's pressures. And we give the caseloads there, or the children in the system, and compared to what the budget was. There is a report elsewhere on the agenda from Keith, which shows the proactive action that Keith is taking in terms of trying to address this situation, and looking at different ways of managing that demand and trying to bring those numbers down. The next section then is in relation to community services, and once again there's a report elsewhere on the agenda in relation to particularly Torvine training and the actions there, again, that are being brought into account or brought to bear to try and reduce that during the year. So then we move on to neighbourhood services, and the adverse protection there is around largely 2 savings measures that are still being worked on and are categorised as high at the moment, and therefore for prudence, we assume for the forecasting that they're not going to be achieved. There's a large section then in relation to procurement. We've had some large savings on procurement cumulatively over a number of years. And we outline there how we intended to bring that in, and then we comment on the things that have frustrated us in that. And then there's a section towards the bottom of page 18 in terms of how we're going to try and address that, both during 17-18, but most importantly, and this goes for all the adverse positions, most importantly in a base budget sense. I mean, there's a big difference between managing an in-year fluctuation during the year using balances or using alternative messages, so that it doesn't then go into 18-19 as a big base budget pressure for the following year. So there's a series of measures there that we're looking at. There's some commentary then on transportation, corporate transportation, largely in relation to home to school transport. That's a timing. That's largely just a timing issue, that it won't materialise in full in 2017-18, but we're not worried about it in terms of a base budget sense for 18-19. In terms of early intervention and prevention and financial resilience, we've assumed that both of those budgets in the monitoring will be spent during the year, or they will be carried forward for the purposes with which they were intended. Then there's a table in 6.1, bottom of page 19, on the mitigations. As part of the budget, in terms of service areas, we approved nearly £3.6 million worth of mitigations, and we've achieved 2.6. Another 400,000 is anticipated to be low or medium. So at the moment, only 500,000 is classified as high risk. So, I think that's a pretty good position to be in from services point of view. So therefore, from a service perspective, the largest pressures are in-year things that are happening to services rather than failing to achieve savings. In terms of the corporate mitigations around procurement, we've already commented on those. In terms of the high ones, in 6.2, those are the ones classified as high at the moment, and for prudence are not then assumed to be achieved. We go into section 7 on use of reserves. You'll see the general fund balance is anticipated to fall to 5.1 by the end of March 18, and the calls on the reserves are listed in the table. We've then got tables on the service area reserves, and you'll see generally the trend is them falling, and you'll see the same on the corporate reserves, with the exception of corporate redundancies, where obviously we're looking to try and boost that to help us with change, and obviously the 21st Century School Reserve, which is all about timing of spend in relation to the 21st Century programme. So that's that situation. capital, assumed full year spend, and there's the details of the variations. So in terms of the overall position, it is a difficult position. It is challenging. But as we always do, we're approaching this in a collegiate and collective manner. There's some focused work going on. I think as evidenced by the 2 reports that will follow on this agenda in relation to social care and community services, and that position will improve as the year goes on.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Any comments or questions for Nigel? Okay, if I can then take you to the recommendations at 10.1. It's recommended that the force cost position in respect of each service area and the actions being taken by the service chief officers to address their adverse variances are noted, and specific approvals relating to use, amendment of reserves are actioned by the leader in accordance with normal practice. Going to have a show of hands in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much, Nigel. If I move on then to agenda item 7, which is the 21st Century Schools Programme Band B proposals. If I can bring in Dermot at this point. Oh, Fiona's leaving. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll draw your attention straight to the key messages in section 3 of the report. The Council will deliver in the region of £87 million of investment in educational buildings in Band A, which we're rapidly coming towards the end of. It's quite a long list of achievements, I would suggest, and on page 38 that list is there, just to remind members of all the things that you've invested in, all the hard decisions that you've taken. And it's quite an extensive list of changes to the face of education in Torvine. And the last section there, on page 39, points out where we are with the design phase currently with Crossy Killiog and the post-16 centre. The investment objectives at the national and local levels for Band B remain largely unchanged, so we're looking at the same sorts of decisions with the same sorts of guidelines. And the Council's investment priorities for Band B, which were discussed I think originally back in 2011, remain largely unchanged as well. So those are outlined on page 37 of the report, which we'll look at in a little bit of detail shortly. The overall level of investment proposed is £44.9 million for Band B, with a financial commitment from the Council of £10 million. Now, people will immediately think, hang on, half and half, what's going on there? So I'll need to explain why the intervention levels are slightly different, and we'll do that shortly. That's subject to Council approval, obviously, as part of the capital programme, and commitments from the Welsh Government, and in this instance the Roman Catholic Archdiocese as well, and I'll detail that now. In Band B, we'll need to work very closely with the Welsh Government as the delivery of Band B advances in light of its views around standardised costings. And that's a slight change from Band A, and that will evolve over time, so we'll have to work closely with Welsh Government as they have some clear views on how much things should cost. And that will be part of the planning process as we proceed, subject to approval. So I take us directly to page 37, where we look at the detail of what's actually proposed in Band B. If I can get it on screen as well at the same time, Chair. Yeah. So the first item there is the Roman Catholic School. Now that is a proposal to look at the replacement of 2 Roman Catholic primary schools and St Albans School on a single site. There's 2 Roman Catholic primary schools being both in Cwmbran, so that is Our Lady's and St David's. The total cost there, we believe, will be in the region, will be £28 million, including the land costs. Now, the intervention rate for faith schools is different. So, Cabinet will be familiar with, in all the proposals we've looked at so far, there's a 50-50 split between Welsh Government funding and the local authority funding. In the case of faith schools, Welsh Government would be providing 85% of the costs, and the diocese would be providing the 15%. We've got a small contribution to make around communal areas in the school, but the vast majority of the costs will come from the diocese and then from Welsh Government. We can't be more specific about what our costs would look like at the moment until we get into the design phase and get much more detailed process. But we think it'll be less than £1 million, and maybe considerably less than £1 million in total. The second project is the complete rebuilding of Maindy Primary School on the existing site. That will obviously include works around the school as well. And we estimate the cost. We estimate. No, I insist. That is the proposal. Thank you, Part. Keeping on the theme. So, and that will cost in the region of, well, it'll cost £11 million, and that will include any sort of access issues as well. And that would be a 50-50 split from Welsh Government and from the local authority, so our contribution there would be £5.5 million. Then items 3 and 4 are about the remodelling of Welsh medium schools, Ysgol Brynon and Ysgol Gymru Cymbraen, totalling 3.5 and 3.4 million, with our relative contributions there outlined below. So a smaller, more compact set of proposals than Band A, but bearing in mind that we met all of our objectives that we set out to achieve in Band A, that's why we're now looking at a more compact position. We're not suggesting statutory closures or local authority schools, but clearly it should be noted that to create a new school, new Roman Catholic school, would entail the diocese looking at the statutory closure of its 3 schools and opening a new school. So there would be a process there for us to support the Archdiocese in. So, Chair, there's obviously a lot of detail in the report, but those are the key points. So I'll stop there and ask for questions.
Okay, any questions or comments there for Dermot? Please? Bring in anything to add, David?
I don't feel it necessary to ask questions because Dermot and I have already discussed this ad nauseum, and unless he's got anything up his sleeve that I'm not aware of, then clearly I know the answers. So anything I would say would be either rhetorical or otiose, and since I'm neither, I'll shut up.
Okay. If we're happy then to move to the recommendations on page 29, I believe. That Cabinet approved the 21st Century Schools Programme Strategic Outline Plan and be updates for submission to Welsh Government. Have a show of hands in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much, Dermot. Move now to bring in Dave Congreve for agenda item 8, the Community Service Unit Adverse Financial Position Projection as at Q1 with regard to Torbine training. David.
There we are. Is that it? Yeah, fine, thank you. Right, I was joking earlier on when I said I could make technology go wrong just by sitting next to it, but actually it isn't actually a joke. It does tend to happen on a regular basis, so it must be user error. There you go. So hopefully that sets the context for this report, which is actually quite a difficult report for me to bring in front of you today. It's unusual, but I think it echoes some of the points that I think Nigel's already made. It's unusual in the nature of the fact that this is a projected position, so it's not actually happened yet, which I think is the good news of it. It's unusual, though, in the sense that actually there are some specific consequences for future years that we just want to touch on towards the end, and I think that echoes Nigel's point about looks like we've got a strategy to manage this position in year, but there may be some clouds on the horizon. So the report talks a little bit about continuing risks, even though there isn't much detail around those at this stage. So probably the best way to approach it really is that I'll just say a few words of introduction, and then I'll take you sequentially through the report in terms of the key points that I want to emphasise. Probably if we start with I think it's always useful in terms of reports of this nature to start with the numbers. And if we take you to 7.14 of the report, that's assuming I can find it and get the technology working. That's where the key numbers are in relation to the numbers you will have seen in Nigel's report, where we talk about an adverse projected variance, not a position as is at the moment, but a projected variance of £432,000. So that's 7.1.4 in the report. which is across the whole of community services unit. The vast majority of that, as you'll see from the figures there, relates to the training position of Torvine Training, which, as you'll see from elsewhere in the report, is a fairly unique provision in the sense that we are the only local authority provided prime contractor to Welsh Government for this type of activity, which has got some benefits and it's also got some disadvantages and costs. But if we stick with the numbers, the £442,000 adverse projection for community services is reduced by virtue of the fact that one of the things that the report contextualises is that we work mainly for two clients. We work mainly for the Welsh Government, and there's been an awful lot of turbulence in that contractual environment that I'll take you through in a second. We also do a piece of work for the Department for Work and Pensions, where actually the DWP contracting environment has remained very stable, and that's been a very favourable factor in this story particularly. So it's from there that we've been able to introduce some surpluses from the DWP side of things to offset some of the difficulties that we're facing in terms of Welsh Government contracts. So those are the figures that help reduce the 432 down to the 282 that's referred to there. There's a further reference then to nearly £100,000, £95,000 worth of activity that we've put on hold, really, and that's from non-grant funded activity within community services, and that's actually quite a small proportion of what we do. Just to remind members that around 80% of the things that we do in community services are funded either by contract or by grant from elsewhere. So there's a relatively small pot of money that we can actually try and kind of balance out some of these difficulties against. Nevertheless, we've identified some opportunities within that, and that's further reduced the projected deficit to around 187,000 across CSU. And probably you didn't notice, but in the report that Nigel was talking about, there was a set of figures around the reserves that are available to service areas. The reserve that we have available in community services is 199,000. So our position at this point in time is that we should be able to manage that adverse projected impact within the resources available to community services in this financial year, which I think is a very good position. That position hasn't come easily. There's been an awful lot of activity, which I'll just touch on in a second or two, mainly implemented by Karen and Stuart, who's the manager down at Torvine Training. Many of you will have the opportunity, I know Alison's been down there shadowing Stuart and the team, and looking at many of the changes that we're going to refer to very briefly that have had a very positive impact on the position at Torvine Training. So from our perspective, one of the very good things that's happening down at Torvine Training is some very solid leadership, some very firm management and some very good results that are starting to materialise in a very difficult external environment. So if I take you then to some of those factors, I won't go through all the detail in the report, but if I just pick up some of the factors around background, you'll see, without emphasising too much of the detail there, that we've been in an environment where the contract values that we've been delivering have been growing almost year on year, and then there's been a significant change in that environment from Welsh Government's perspective, where the contract size changed and the criteria which we were asked to deliver changed quite significantly. You'll see also in the report a reference to the fact that actually change in Torvine Training means change for learners who are actually in learning over a 2-year period. So there's a projected and protracted kind of period of change that impacts on Torvine Training that doesn't normally relate to other provision that we operate. The three factors that the report picks out particularly are significant changes to the nature and level of contracts let by Welsh Government, and those are picked up in 6.1.1. Some changes then, I think, to the way in which we've had to respond to those contractual environments, and that's in 6.2.1. And then a series of very difficult external events, which is in 6.3.1. So in some ways, it's almost a perfect storm of externally driven factors that actually have made this a very difficult operation for Stuart and the team to get to grips with. Having said all of that, and I can go through all of those if you wish, but I think it's probably more important for us to concentrate then on the actions that have been taken, which are started in 7.1. And we talk really about 3 sets of actions in response to those. Quite a lot of activity in terms of staffing change, inevitably a few redundancies, some changes in redeployment and some recruitment changes to focus on giving us new capabilities and new capacities. So when the environment changes and we're asked to do new things, we need new people with new skills and different capabilities to do that sometimes. So quite a lot in terms of staffing changes, which are outlined in the report there. Key statistic, I think, from our point of view is that over the 2 years in question, around 40% of the people currently employed at Torvine Training have either changed role or are new appointments. So that's a very volatile staffing environment for Stuart to lead in. Management of subcontractors, which is one of the issues, I think, that also shares some heritage between this set of issues at Torvine Training and some of the wider issues that Essen have commented on. But actually, we've now got a very strong contract management framework for managing subcontractors, and that's based almost entirely on experience that Stuart's brought with him, which is excellent from our point of view, and that does mean that we've got a much tighter grasp on the issues around subcontracting. Having said all of that, even if we'd had that management framework in place, the nature of the one-off events that we describe elsewhere wouldn't have been able to have been changed. They wouldn't have been able to be predicted or changed, but it does give us a very good platform going forward. The third set of factors that we pick out as changing down there are marketing, and from a personal point of view, that means now that Karen and myself, which is information we also share with the executive member regularly, get a very good handle on how many people are in the pipeline. So how many new starts are we projecting now, because marketing officers have a caseload, have individual companies to work with, we have named prospects, if you like, for people who we expect to turn into trainees in the next 3 months or so. So that gives us a much firmer platform going forward in terms of confidence about what are we likely to be doing in terms of business in the next 3 months or so. So I think I've covered 7.1.4, which is the actions and the impact, and I suppose the thing to emphasise really again is that this is a projected set of figures, it's not actual at this point in time. If things don't get any worse and if we are able to manage with the changes that we put in place, there shouldn't be any wider impact on the Council's position. We should be able to manage this within community services, which is certainly the brief that I've given Stuart and Karen. And then just to conclude, outlook for the year beyond, really, and I suppose we could bring together the outlook for the year beyond and some of the points made in terms of continuing risks. Having said that Welsh Government have made some changes, so they made some changes in 2015, some of those changes were mitigated to some extent more recently in terms of relaxing some of those criteria. But you'll notice in 7.1.5 that actually this financial year we will start on a procurement process for 2019-20, which is when those contracts will start. So actually we don't know much about that activity at this point in time other than to say there is a sense that Welsh Government might be looking for more consolidation of contracts within that next round of provision. So that will bring its own challenges, no doubt. If I then just take you then finally to, well, I guess in terms of continuing risks, we've talked about the future. The other one that's pulled out or is worth pulling out, which is you'll all be aware of, it's on the news every evening really, is around the business confidence. Obviously investing in training for employees is quite a significant decision for businesses and employers. We will just have to see how that pans out, really. I mean, having a good intelligence system about prospects means that at this point in time, we're not particularly worried about that, but that will follow the national position in terms of the sort of confidence, no doubt. Conclusions, I think I would just say 3 things, really, rather than go through each of those. At risk of being boring, it is a projected position. We are managing that in terms of a lot of change that's happened down there. We have resources that should be able to cover off the majority of the difficulty that we see this year. There will be some issues that we will need to think through in terms of the base budget construction, given the uncertainty, but that will be part of the wider process in terms of financial monitoring. I think the second thing to sort of say is that actually, although this looks like a very difficult set of circumstances, I've been hugely impressed by the leadership shown down at Torvine Training and the attitude of all the employees down there as well. I think we've got a team that's very highly committed, given the difficulties that they've gone through recently. And then finally, from my perspective, there is reference in the report to Torvine Training being a social value provider, and I think that is worth just a brief mention at the end there. We've had a lot of benefits over the years from being a local authority that's had training provision that's operated to generate a surplus for us to offset consequences elsewhere. This is unfortunately part of a second year actually, where we've experienced perhaps some difficulties, but the long-term position with Torvine Training is very solid and we expect it to remain so, subject to a more stable environment. I'll conclude there, Leader, and take any questions or defer to the experts if need be.
Thank you very much, David. And I think the reports 6, 8 and 9 today are very much linked, but they all sort of focus around the fact that there are pressures and challenges that we can't control. What we can control is that we have the processes to identify where there's a challenge and to respond accordingly. And I think both within departments and as a corporate whole, that's our responsibility to do what we can to bring these in-year challenges in so they don't affect us going forwards. And I recognise the thanks that you give to the staff in Torvine training. Obviously, as we come to the next item on children's services, again, that's an area of demand that can come up on us without us necessarily having any control on it. But what we do have control on is how we respond to it and how we try and manage the situation appropriately. Don't just panic, but have a controlled way of resolving it within the year, so that it doesn't affect things going forward. So thank you for that report. Does anyone else want to come in at this point?
Yeah. The reason I'd like to say a few words here is because in the last couple of months since I've taken over this addition to the brief, I've visited both Springvale, Trevethin and other elements. I've had detailed discussions with the manager of Torvine Training and briefings galore from both Dave Congreve and Karen, explaining the circumstances, the reason why Torvine Training is financially where it is. I won't bore you with repeating what Dave has already said. I'm sure that you all understand the generality of it. But I think it's worth mentioning because I have had certain whispers from others that this might very well be a reflection of poor management of Torvine Training. I can say categorically that isn't the case. In fact, quite the reverse. The management at Torvine Training is first class, and I think had it not been the case, then the circumstances that they find themselves in at the moment would perhaps be significantly worse. So they are to be applauded in that sense. Again, the circumstances include things that were beyond the control of Torvine Training, and they've grappled with these manfully and I think successfully. And I would echo everything that David has said, plus saying this, that the ongoing work of Torvine Training, yes, David is right, David Congreve is right when he says that it is a social provider in a sense, but it is also very, very competent in terms of its business-like approach to what it does. So it isn't just a drip and a drain on our resources ad nauseum. This is a blip, it will be corrected, and they will continue to have that two-pronged approach. It's both a social provider, but it also is capable of making money as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to come in at this point? Okay, Councillor Crick.
Can I just ask Dave, I think this is an extremely good report and it highlights very much the problems that you've faced and how you've overcome them. But obviously your reserves have dipped and will be dipping very considerably because of this. Have you looked at how you can deal with that? Obviously you speak I think it's in somewhere in paragraph 9 about the possibility of bringing in monies from the overall reserves of the council. But clearly you'd like to be as independent as you can be, so I was just wondering what the plans were there.
Well, hopefully, as we said in the report, probably get Torvine Training to run a training scheme on how to operate the microphones, actually. Hopefully there are other opportunities for Torvine Training because, as we've said, with the work programme, that is likely to change in the 12 to 18 months ahead. That may present us with further opportunities. That's been a very helpful position for us. We're not quite sure what the future holds in terms of work-based learning. It's a very competitive environment if we started to compete for perhaps more ad hoc work, put it in that way, but there are other opportunities for us. I think the main issue for us, I think, is when we put the base budget together for next year, we won't again have the full information about the contracting environment, so we'll have to make some assumptions which is what we've done on previous years. I think we may be, well, obviously we'll be guided by Nigel and Dave in terms of the overall position, but the consequences of that may need to spill out from Torvine training and may need to spill out elsewhere. But we're a long way off that at the moment. I'm very hopeful, and certainly the brief that we are working to is to try and maintain this as a set of issues within community services.
Okay, if everyone else is happy, then we can move to the recommendations at 10.1 on page 65 of your agendas, and the Cabinet notes the content of this report and seeks further updated information at the meeting, noting that the matter will remain under review through the Council's normal financial monitoring process. Can I have a show of hands in favour, please? That's carried. Thank you very much, David. Right, the next item on our agenda is managing demand in children's services, and again this refers back to the report number 6 and what we're doing in this specific service area to manage the demand and to bring things back on track.
Can't find the report. Can't see it at all. Thank you. Morning. I think Nigel's probably raised the main issue relating to this report, and it's the current financial position in social care and housing at the ends of periods 3 and 4. As you'll note from the report, there is a significant overspend in children's services of over 1.8 million. This is mainly, or in the main, due to the third-party spend, so that's the accommodation costs for the looked after children, which we've seen a significant rise in. With this in mind, within the service area, we've taken a number of actions immediately to try and address some of these things, and they're cited at 4.1. Yeah. So that I'll go through them one by one, I suppose. The children in high-cost placements are reviewed on a monthly basis. We've recruited a fixed-term post for to recruit mother and baby placements, so we're having to go externally for those, and they were very expensive. That's been very successful. We managed to recruit 4, so that our reliance on that has reduced. And in fact, we've now gone to we've gone beyond the Investors Aid money and established the post, and we're jointly funding it with Monmouthshire because they have a similar problem. We're working with the Play and Youth Service to put packages around children to keep them with their parents or within their foster placements so that they don't jettison out to even more expensive placements. The project to discharge care orders that we drew money down from the reserve last year to do was successful when we managed to reduce that by 15. But unfortunately, as we reduced them, the judiciary increased them because for whatever reason, the old system of the principle of no order doesn't appear to exist anymore, and we are being pulled into court more and more where we're working with families on a voluntary basis and being given orders. But it's something that we're trying to take up as a group of directors across the Gwent area. We've got additional staff in family focus, again, is working part of the early intervention agenda, and we've got a social worker recently appointed to recruit carers for the MIST project, so these are therapeutic carers, and we hope that will be successful because at the moment we've got, I think, 5 carers, and they save us probably in the region of £250,000 a year per child, because those are the children who would end up outside in extremely expensive placements. We've recently brought the Families First service into social care, and I think that will give us a sort of a more seamless approach to early intervention. That's no criticism of how it was before, but I think it will, because we've got one process now. And we've secured some additional funding from the early intervention programme to recruit to that, and that recruitment has taken place. We've appointed a post for continuing healthcare across Gwent to challenge the issue in children's services, because across the area none of us achieve anything really for children. An example with a young girl placed in a very expensive placement at 18, she suddenly became miraculously continuing healthcare and was fully funded. We totally carried that, and it was costing us in the region of £7,000 a week. We do challenge it, but it's just a very difficult area. The criteria does vary from adults to children, but it is something that we are pushing again, and we think having this dedicated worker will at least give some real challenge to the process. We've established a transformation team to review the structure of family support, and that's going to report on a monthly basis to me in terms of the progress of the new programmes that we're bringing in, and they're now detailed at 5.1. We've received some grant money, and we are in the process of developing. We're out at advert now to recruit to an intensive support service. This will give us a wraparound service to children outside of normal working hours, so that if a family's in crisis, we can work with them within the family home, or indeed in a foster home if it looks rocky, that we can try and keep those there. We've done some calculations on what we think it could achieve. So if we can prevent accommodation, 40 children, prevent foster placement breakdown, 20 children, and rebuild children home, 10, we think the savings there could be in the region of £890,000. And so we've seen this happen in another authority, so I think it can really work. It's stemming the tide, I think, is the big issue. We've established a project on bespoke packages of care, because we've had a number of children living, or young people living in accommodation in the community. These are not registered children's homes, they're different. These are for children over 16, but these are children with complex needs who can't live on their own or can't live in the accommodation that we've currently got. We're putting additional staff into MIST, of 2 additional staff, because as I said, I think if we can recruit, those staff do work in a therapeutic way and are well able to keep children out of the system, and that, along with the additional foster carers we hope to recruit, I think will make some considerable savings. So as I said, we've developed a transformation team. We've set some targets, and I think they're quite challenging targets, but I think we have to have them. So preventing children entering the care system, 495,000. Prevent 17 foster placements breaking down, because if they break down, they jump from what is a modest amount of money, or relatively modest, £200 or £300 a week, to probably several thousand a week for a residential. And the bespoke packages, which we think even one of those will make us a saving of £50,000. So essentially, that's where we're at. I think it's important, we don't sit on our hands and do nothing. I think we've tried to be creative and, look for solutions rather than just allow the overspend to continue to run out of control.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Does anyone want to come in before me?
I'll just say, given the financial pressures and challenges we face, I think the action that has been developed are welcomed. There's no guarantee that, the savings are going to work, but sorry, I've gone off solely. I'm on the blonde moment. Big stress, if we do nothing, we have to do something to address these fears and challenges that we face. So I welcome all proposals.
Just picking up on what Mandy said, it's not a case of doing nothing, and it's not a case of throwing money at a problem. And I think it's a very honest and open report, as the previous one was. And I think it takes the direction the council's going generally. We do have to transform. We're not getting the money as a council as we've previously had. The Welsh Government's not getting the money that it previously had, and that's affecting our citizens at the front end. But Keith in this report shows, and transformation is the big word, and I know we're on a path to transformation, T22 as it's dubbed, and it's the way the council has to go. If we don't change, these people will go under the radar and we will lose the services. So Keith and his team are very innovative in this. I have to thank the backing of the financial team as well, because I know other authorities don't get the support, and Nigel and David and the rest of the team there are supporting us, and when there are monies available, and we have in the past been relatively protected from the cuts that other departments have, But we are at the point, if we don't transform, we will lose services, and that will affect the people of this valley.
Thank Richard for that comment about the way that we try and deal with these things corporately together. I think that's the right way of doing it, because I think Keith always recognises that social care, you know, if you look at the experience of other councils across the country, has the ability to make everything else sort of fall apart financially for the council. And I know Keith and his officers and Richard and Mandy recognise that and work in a corporate way instead of, you know, holding the rest of the council to ransom. I think this report very ably and thoroughly demonstrates that we're taking the actions necessary to try and bring this situation under control. It is a situation, as has been referenced before, that's a consequence of several years of very tight settlements and growing demand, and the two things in combination. Obviously, you know, it doesn't take a mathematician to tell you that's going to cause a problem the longer that goes on. But I think we're doing our best to bring those issues under control. It's quite revealing the figures that you mentioned in terms of sort of single placements can cost thousands of pounds a week for one individual, and we're in a very difficult position there as an organisation, because obviously we have an obligation to keep children who are in danger safe and to do everything we can to make sure they don't come to harm. But the financial consequences of that can be extremely severe. We have to do everything we can to try and manage and reduce that demand, to try and manage down the number of looked after children by intervening earlier, by using preventative measures. I think that the steps we took in the previous budget are hopefully going to continue to help in that respect. But when a situation presents itself, we don't have control over whether we need to intervene or not. If we need to intervene, we need to intervene. And I think in that context, the department's doing a good job of recognising the financial situation and taking action to try and bring it under control. So thank you for the report. If there are no other comments, David?
It's not really a point on the substantive item, really, but I reference the Future Generations Bill. I think it's really good that we've I've talked about it a lot about investing in the future, in the early intervention and prevention money that we put aside. We're in the process of establishing the best possible way of spending that. Hopefully that will yield results for departments such as yours, which it really needs to, because it's a perfect example of where it's a perfect example of intervening at exactly the right point. Children's services right at the time when they really, really need our intervention. So, and just our general way of working in line with the Future Generations Bill, I think will hopefully yield results somewhere down the line. And I was trying to segue into a point about the wellbeing assessment at the end. It's this and the previous item as well. I noticed that it was missing from it, and it's just a gentle reminder just to make sure that it goes through that process, because I think it does add something to items such as this, really. That's it.
Okay, that's a fair point from David, and something we need to keep an eye on. If I can bring to the recommendations then, on page 72, 6.1 is to note the development and implementation of an intensive family support service. 6.2 is to note the implementation of the intensive housing support for young people and with complex needs. And 6.3 to note the increase in the capacity of MIST by funding the 2 additional posts. Are we all happy to approve the report? Thank you. If we move on then to agenda item 10, which is the Code of Corporate Governance report. I'll bring in Dennis.
Thank you, Leader. The purpose of this report is for Cabinet to approve the Code of Corporate Governance. We are required to have a code, and that was last approved by Cabinet in 2014. And the code sets out the authority's approach to achieving and maintaining good corporate governance. The code has been recently reviewed by the Governance Review Group, taking into account the new governance framework model published by CIPFA in September 2016 and Welsh guidance published in late November 2016. The code is based upon 7 core principles, and those are set out in paragraph 5.2 of the report. Previously there were 6 principles, but many of them are the same. Social and environmental outcomes are now a key focus of the processes and structures. The code, which is attached as the appendix, is split into 3 columns. The principles, the activities we carry out to meet the requirements of the principles, and examples of how the principles are evidenced. We do comply with the majority of the code's requirements, but there is one small area where we have identified a gap, and that is ensuring that external providers of services are required to act with integrity and in compliance with ethical standards expected by the organisation. This will obviously be considered and looked at further by the Governance Review Group. The leadership team and the audit committee have been consulted on the code, and therefore the recommendation is contained in paragraph 9 that Cabinet approves the code of corporate governance attached to this report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Delith. I bring in Veronica.
Thank you, Delith. This was obviously something that needed updating, and as you say, there is some further work to be done. But the recommendation is that we approve it as it is at the moment. One thing I would like to suggest is that a copy of it goes on the hub so that all members have immediate access to it should they need it. It's one of those very useful documents that I think it would be very helpful to have there. So thank you.
Arrange for that to be done, Councillor.
That's a good suggestion. So the recommendation is on page 77 that Cabinet approves the Code of Corporate Governance attached to this report. Can I have a show of hands in favour? That's passed. That brings us to the end of the agenda items today. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the week.